Hello and welcome to Bloomberg Quint. You're watching the fine print and we're coming to you today from On Location, International Fiscal Association's two-day tax conference here in New Delhi that saw participation from the judiciary, the revenue department and leading tax practitioners. And an important voice opened day one session here today, and of that of Akhilesh Ranjan, member CBDT. And Mr. Ranjan started off by saying that if the world believed that BEPS, or the base erosion profit shifting project of the OECD, was the answer to all the problems of global taxation, then, well, we all were wrong. He went on to elaborate that how the gaps in the OECD's plan prompted India to take the unilateral action of introducing equalization levy, which is essentially a tax on digital business advertising. He then went on to share his thoughts on the approach the CBDT committee has taken in its recent draft report on attribution of profits to permanent establishment. Listen in.
The international tax landscape is not just emerging, as we have just heard. It's moving extremely fast. It's moving so fast that it is very difficult, especially for tax administrations, to keep pace with this movement. I can tell you that we are receiving notes and mails and phone calls from the inclusive framework, from the OECD almost every week. New ideas, new suggestions, things that we have to respond to in 2 days' time. It's a mad rush, absolutely, to get down to some serious discussion on these very, very important issues. And Boris was right. And if you thought that BEPS was it, that was the end of reform, I think we were sadly mistaken. BEPS served a very, very important purpose. It did open the door for thinking on reforms in international tax. It might have served to only plug a few loopholes. I've heard a lot of criticism in certain quarters. But I think one should not belittle that achievement, because it has really opened the door for thinking on reforms. Not to say that things like anti-abuse provisions, the treaties, or country-by-country reporting are of less importance. They are extremely important steps. But it's true that they did not resolve the fundamental problems of international taxation. But now that the doors were opened, as expected, the debate commenced on issues which we've again been hearing and talking about. The debate on the digitalization of economies, which now does not remain a discussion on how to tax digital services. It is a discussion on the allocation of taxing rights. It's a much, much broader discussion which is necessitated by the problems and the challenges posed by the digital economy. That's what was one of the fundamental issues of international tax, which BEPS had skirted, had not really addressed. And when this has now come to the forefront, I think this is one of the most important eras in international tax globally for every country and I think what will happen in the next 2 years may decide the course of taxation for the next 20 or 30 years. Hence the importance of getting things right this time and not letting things go away. The second issue that BEPS did not talk about was the disparity in tax structures in different countries. The so-called low tax jurisdictions, one couldn't address that because that's a sovereign function. Tax rates and tax structures is something which each country decides. But then it was giving rise to issues which were making all the reforms not so effective when it came down to the actual field operations. So along with the proposals that are under discussion, as Boris has just detailed, on the digitalization of economies, there is a parallel discussion on a sort of minimum tax. And I think one should not ignore the importance of that discussion also. India may or may not be too heavily involved in that discussion because we are actually devoting more of our attention to the allocation of taxing rights. But that discussion is something which is also going to the root of the problem. It would have as its final objective a sort of standardization of tax structures across the world. And if that happens, then I think many problems of the world would get resolved. It's a huge objective. It's something which I don't know can happen right now. It will take years to bring together, but it's a step in the right direction. Measures have to be taken to persuade economies and jurisdictions to follow some sort of international standards in their tax structures. So these are the two fronts on which discussion is going on globally, and I think it's something, and that's why it makes things so very important to participate in those discussions right now, to contribute, to see that our voice is heard. Grateful to Porus again for complimenting India's stance on this. Yes, we have taken a very sober, a very considered approach on these issues. We made it clear right from the beginning that we believe that the challenges thrown by the digital economy need a fundamental change in tax rules. We said if you can't get consensus on these issues, we are going ahead. We will take unilateral measures like the equalization levy, and we did it. When we did it, dozens of countries followed us. The EU brought out a paper. France, I believe, has just almost approved something. The UK is doing something. I don't know. Every country is jumping onto the bandwagon. We said we are introducing this interim measure. It is an interim measure because we realize that this is not the best way of taxation. We would like to have a consensus on actual corporate net profit taxation. But then that needs drastic changes in the rules. That needs a fundamental shift from the concept of fixed place of business. It needs a fundamental change in the allocation and attribution rules. The thinking which is going on for the last 70 years of profits being taxable only on the basis of a fixed place of business, and in the last 8 or 9 years of profits having to be attributed on pure transfer pricing principles. These are concepts that we don't think can work in the modern world. And that's coming out in these discussions more and more. Yes, when they talk about marketing intangibles, the US does talk about a residual profit split. But that residual profit split is not the traditional arm's length approach to profit split. It cannot be. Normal transfer pricing based on FAR cannot and will not work in this scenario. We have to look beyond that. Hence, India made another intervention. We made our point clear that we are not only talking about a change in the rules of nexus, we are not only talking about a significant economic presence in addition to a fixed place of business, we are also talking about a different way of apportioning or allocating income. It may not be a formulary apportionment. Formulary apportionment has its own problems. How do you get the profit in different jurisdictions? How do you combine that, and how do you then allocate it? We have proposed a sort of a fractional apportionment, which is different from a formulary apportionment, and which stresses mainly on sales and the revenue derived from a jurisdiction as an indicator of the amount of profit that should be allocated. When we first moved this proposal, there was no serious attempt to look at this. But more and more, the more we discussed and put forward our views and showed that your values, your sales, your profits are coming from the market to a greater and greater extent, countries have had to look twice at this. And now major nations of the world are quite in agreement on this concept that the contribution of the market has to be kept in mind in allocating income. So we have made our points. We have brought them into our domestic law. This recent CBDT discussion draft that is open to the public, is another step in that direction. We just want to make it very, very clear as to what we are saying. We want to involve you. We want to get your views and your reactions. And let's not just give a reaction from the point of view of industry. Let's give a reaction from the point of view of what the new world order should be. We as tax professionals, as members of the industry, let us get away from narrow sectarian interests and think globally of what should be. Maybe we are not right. Maybe we are missing something in our proposal. I'm sure we are missing things in our proposal. But we need you to tell us. Who will tell us? So I do wish that people respond to the discussion draft. People tell us their views. People tell us that if there are other ways of achieving the same objective that we have. And our objective is, firstly, as I said, to change the taxation rules of nexus by bringing in a concept of significant economic presence, and secondly, to change the rules of attribution from a pure transfer pricing approach to a more fractional apportionment approach, which can rely more heavily on market forces of demand and can be represented by proxies in the form of sales revenue. These are the issues, ladies and gentlemen, that I think are on the top of our minds. It's an appropriate time for a conference like this. I'm sure these issues and these matters will be discussed time and again in the next 2 days. I really wish you all the very best and a very scintillating conference the next 2 days. And once again, thank you for inviting me over. Thank you very much.